We were
Yeah.
playing in Bobby's room, and it was a big PLO game, and the board was like Ace King Seven. You threw that small versus cutoff or button, and a turn was a king or a seven.
So you do remember this. I don't know if I give a live tell for that or not. Those spots I'm not as balanced all the time, but
You definitely did, for what it's worth. But
all right, everybody. Today we've got someone with the perfect poker name and quite a name in poker. He's got over 15.7 million winnings in tournaments alone, but he's done a lot of things. He's been around the poker world and he's presumably beating live cash games for million as well. But he's came up through the tournaments and he's done a bunch of other big things in poker too, like create a training site and coach a lot himself and travel all over, done some short deck and PLO, and apparently is a master of live read. Got some of that live read mystical skills, some chance magic or some.
white magic.
Is it white magic? What kind of magic is it?
I mean, I got to give like props to Helmuth, right? Like it's called white magic because of him, and I definitely think that he's one of the best at it.
I'm gonna have to disagree with that, but what do I know? Maybe against VIPs, but Chance Cornuth, so that everyone knows your name, in case it's not said enough. And yeah, you've even got the trophies in the background just to make the point.
I need to change the background up a little bit, actually.
What are you gonna change it to? What's a better background than the trophies?
I kind of want to like custom, like have an office in the new house and just like have like the industrial brick with like wood and maybe metal, that type of vibe.
Oh, okay. If that suits you, I guess. I mean, it seems really obvious to have the trophies if you're doing poker podcasts and things like that, and making poker products. Like
Yeah,
there's
I mean, I
clear
have a lot
form
of
of
content
proof.
with this background though.
All right. Well, you can go for it. I guess you're probably more experienced in content than me. I do want to talk about this live read thing a little bit, just because I'm fascinated by it. I have my own views of live reads, and at some point it occurred to me that I actually use live reads a decent amount, but not in the same way that other people do. Certain ones are really reliable, but it really helps. In my opinion, they work kind of like, in a way, kind of like how poker works. There are ranges, and people can be polarized, or they can have mergy ranges. They can pigeonhole themselves in these stupid ways if you really look at it. It's hard to really like pinpoint exactly what someone has, but you can make some suppositions based on several things. And I'm not personally impressed with Phil Hellmuth with at least how he's played against me specifically with the live reads. I'm not seeing this white magic honestly with almost
Yeah, I mean,
anyone.
there's a lot of players that I haven't done perfect against with my live reads either, but then there's countless others that I've crushed with them. So I would say that, yeah, I mean, it's not a perfect art, right? Nothing is, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't increase the frequency in which your decisions are correct.
Sure, sure. I mean, that's kind of where we're going with that. I mean, also same thing with poker. Do you want to talk about some white magic or your live poker read course?
So I actually created a Live Tails course a year ago now and had like a custom chip leader coaching table made and got custom chips and had a production guy come and set up here in my office and recorded it, but I decided not to release it because I thought it was too good. And then I had the summer I had last summer, so I felt pretty good about that decision. However, I do think maybe this fall or next spring I'll release it. Like it's just sitting there. It feels like a shame to waste it. But I will say that live reads aren't necessarily. I mean, sometimes they are, but like the cookie cutter Teddy KGB, you just know if the guy's weak or strong. And like you said, it's more of sometimes they're polar, sometimes like it will. If someone snap shoves the river, it's very unlikely unless it's a high level player that they have like a thin value bet because they had to know
Sure.
immediately that they want to do a bluff or immediately that they wanted to value bet. And so there's like other scenarios that are more indicative to the strength of someone's hand, maybe a betting motion, way they check. There's like a lot of different things that I can go into lightly without giving away too much at this point. But
Just give
yeah,
the
I mean, I think
tease.
that just a little tease, But there's countless different areas. I've studied, Joe Navarro and Mike Caro and a lot of the Live Tells original goats, And I would say that some of the things that they preached at the time aren't necessarily true anymore because people are considerably more adept at it, at concealing their tells and conscious of what they're giving away. But, throughout the 15 years of playing that I've had in live poker, those tells that I initially learned and everything has kind of like shifted and melded into what the current landscape is. And like things will happen where I'll get tricked for a few months and they won't be as useful, but it doesn't take too much time for me to pick up what the changes are and what people are putting out there.
Okay, well, first thing is, do you think Joe Navarro and Mike Currow are actually good at tells?
Not anymore. I think they were 15, 20 years ago.
Okay. I don't know personally. I've read some of their stuff
I
and
don't either, but like the Joe Navarro video course, I thought was like incredible. And the
really.
Caro book was helpful back in the day as well.
I read both Joe Navarro's and Mike Currow's books, and I don't know. It seemed kind of like pop psychology for Joe Navarro's book, especially when we're talking about negotiations. I thought Chris Voss's book for negotiations was far wildly better, but like
Wait,
I
what
like
was
Chris Voss a
who is it?
lot. Chris Voss,
Chris
but
Voss.
that's like applies to real life. Like he has really practical advice that applies to real life. Whereas Joe Navarro said a lot of things where I don't think people are this telegraphic with their body language and things like that. And at least, I can give an example actually. That's a really funny example. Um, I just don't think people like their feet like really tells you that much beyond what's obvious, really. Um, as an example, Phil Sternheimer read Joe Navarro's book, and your buddy Ben Lamb. Did you hear about this?
No,
Your, your,
I'm intrigued.
your buddy, your buddy Ben Lamb knew that he read that book, and so Ben Lamb pointed his feet in the direction that he wanted Phil to make his decision based off of. So he knew that he was looking at Ben's feet. He would click under the table, and then he do the wrong thing.
That's next level. I love it. I mean, Ben
It's
is
hard
one
to.
of the absolute goats at it, right? And so when you're choosing, like, think of it like everyone's on a different level, right? And so, yeah, if someone's level 0, 1, whatever, you can take these pieces of information and apply them. But as the levels change and people's knowledge and understanding of them change, you basically just like reverse. So it's like, okay, this was weak, now it's strong. This was strong, now it's weak. And, Ben is incredibly adept at, I call it like rock, paper, scissors, where it's knowing what level someone's on and how to counteract with it. And I think that's hilarious. Just the fact that, people go and read, they have this like baseline knowledge of a situation, they're still like a novice, and then they think they're going to use it on one of the most adept players in the world at it. Like, it's a joke, That's just like not how you apply it. And so for me, that's like incredibly comical. And to think that he could read a book or watch a course and be better or get a read on someone that's like one of the best in the world at it is hilarious.
Well, Philip's pretty stubborn. He's like trying to be a pro. He's he's getting there, I guess you could say. It's hard to beat the actual best in the world. He's very smart though. You have to think of him that. It's hard to beat best of the world at anything. Like pure effort kind of trumps a lot of intelligence or whatever the it is.
I do think
Um,
intelligence in poker is often people's ceiling, right? Like it doesn't matter how hard someone works if they're just a moron. They're not going to be able to get great at the game. Like you're obviously very intelligent, Phil very intelligent. Like these are people that are able to have a high level of success at the game because it's one of the limiting factors. Don't get me wrong, like hard work is also a limiting factor for your skill in poker.
that's certainly true. It requires a certain kind of intelligence and also a certain kind of openness to change your view, which is
Yeah.
not exactly intelligence, by the way. It's like almost like equivalent to flexibility, I would guess, to fitness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I could see that. And I like I said, I don't think it's like the only limiting factor.
Yeah, yeah. There's a number of things. There's a few things I do personally to deflect a lot of the live tell stuff. I think that a lot of the live tell things have shifted in form. There's a lot of like variations of weak and strong as weak that people still use. For example, the
Yeah, which
underlying
is the exact
principles.
same concept I just talked about, how it switches at every level as the game changes.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Okay. I guess you basically said what I said. I just didn't realize it. And I think that yeah, there's a few underlying psychological principles I've noticed across populations, but you can only really see them with loads of experience. Um, but yeah, it's not so obvious. You have to like really know which details to pay attention to, and usually people, if the people don't care, then you have to look for certain other sorts of things. You have to wait for them to get sloppy.
Yeah, that's true. I think when people are very conscious of it, it's considerably more difficult to pick up on things. Like I remember playing in the Poker Go studio against some elites, and I would spend so much time focusing on this, and it took me like days or tournaments or just like tons of hours to get live tells on some of the players in there. And there was like a while early on before I even picked any up where I was like, is this even worth it? Like, I have a shot clock. Shouldn't I be focused on that? And then when you finally start to like get some on these people as you're decoding the information, it definitely becomes more worth it. But then like that's against the elites, right? Like it should be harder to get a tell on the elite. But then I have some stuff that's just like baseline strategy that I can sit down with John Smith at the table and just know that like, oh, okay, this is probably weak.
Yeah, I do a lot of that as well. I would think actually. So, do you find that really practical these days, especially when you're playing? It seems like you're playing a lot of PGT, Poker Tour type stuff. I would think that's really tough actually in comparison to a lot of what's out there because all the pros are in like Las Vegas or whatever or Los
Yeah, I mean,
Angeles.
the shot clock limits the ability of live tells you're able to get on people, just because like I mean, even consider the fact if someone is bluffing and it's a big spot, most people can hold it together for a little bit of time before the wheels really start to come off and like you know what I'm saying. So like I would say that it definitely hurts, and for those games, you do want to just have like a really strong GTO baseline with some exploits in there, and know which way you want to deviate slightly. Because if you deviate too much on either direction against good players, you're probably either not going to get paid, or if you're playing too tight, and if you're playing too loose, they're just going to three bet the shit out of you. So, it's definitely adjustments that you can take against different player pools, and knowing which strategy to take into each field is a major key to success.
Right, right. Well, I'm also asking, is there much value to these sorts of things? Are these tournaments still quite beatable for a significant portion of the field? Is what I'm asking, or a significant amount of people.
Yeah, I think that the live tells are incredibly valuable at every buy-in level.
Oh, okay, that's promising. I will say definitely people are not playing anywhere near GTO. I know that based on looking at some stuff. It's extremely hard to do that. There's in theory value there. Uh, before I want to talk a bit more about your path to success, but before that, I want to give you a little bit of props because I don't know if I gave a lot live tell on this ages ago, but I remember one hand specifically against you where we played PLO and I got to the river, I three bet something like this. And then I checked on the river with a full house with aces full, and you check back like kings and sevens full or something
I
like that.
remember this actually. We were
Yeah,
playing in Bobby's room, and it was a big PLO game. And the board was like Ace King Seven. You three bet small versus cut off or button, and in a turn was a king or a seven.
yeah. So you do remember this. I don't know if I give a live tell for that or not. Those spots I'm not as balanced all the time, but
You definitely did, for what it's worth. But
yeah, okay. Well, that sucks, I guess. If that's true, I hope it's not true. But what do I know? The evidence seems to suggest I did somehow.
yeah,
Um,
I mean, like someone sent me some clip that Berkey said that like me, Foxen, and Stevie probably have never gotten a live tell in our lives, and we're the most like overrated players ever. And it just like really made me laugh because like, okay, well, either live tells aren't real and we're just that much better at poker than everyone, or live tells are real. So like, no matter what perspective he's coming at it from, he's just blatantly wrong. And so I just like found that incredibly amusing.
oh, well, I don't understand his reason for talking shit. Like, I mean, I imagine you guys must be doing something right, especially with all your success, or you're able to launch a business, which I've had experience in now. Like, launching a business is not easy.
Yeah, it's I can honestly say that if it wasn't for me and Foxen being like the faces of the company, that the business probably wouldn't have been successful. Like I had focused more on like playing poker than I had been making like a well-oiled machine of a business. And for the last 3 months, 3.5 months now, I've actually stayed home, focused on the company, spent time with my wife and kid, and it's been like a considerably different lifestyle than I'm used to, I would say. But it
Hmm.
has its own version of rewards.
Well, I'd like to go into that, but why don't we start with how you actually made your success? I understand it looks like it's just like tournaments a lot, but I imagine you play like a lot of like live catch games. It doesn't look like it's so much online, or maybe I'm mistaken. Do you want to get into that? Because I know we played online actually.
Yeah. So early on, I played like what we called like the grocery game in college. We'd go and make a few $100s, and then I started grinding online. And very early on, I was 8 tabling or 12 tabling 1-2 PLO and winning at like 25 big blinds per 100, which at the time it was like a much easier game. It was basically like bluff everyone and beat aces, so it was like really easy to win at a high rate. And then I met Ben Lamb early in my poker career, and it's actually a pretty good story. So I came out with like 40K in my backpack. I had 50K at the time, and I'm sitting down at this poker table, and it's like a really tough 3K. We're seven-handed, and Ben Lamb is like raise folding every single hand. And then he's under the gun. He's on my direct right, and he folds in such a way that the cards kind of like trail up, you know. And he
Hmm.
says they flipped over, or I say they flipped over. He says they got exposed and had to be flipped over, but irrelevant. The dealer flips them over, and it's like ace ten or ace jack. And I like am a little bit perplexed for a second, and then like 5 seconds later, I look at him and I go, "You did that on purpose." And he goes, "I'm Ben. We need to be friends." And I actually moved in with him a month later, and I learned a lot from PLO, from live tells, from No Limit, perspective, flow, game theory, and Ben is just a great poker mind. He plays much more rarely these days and has a lot of other interests, I would say, between golf and business, etc. But that was like one of my biggest early jumps. Like soon after meeting Ben, it gave me like a ton of confidence that like I could actually do it. And I had like my first 50K day, my first 100K month soon after that, and moved in with him right after that month. And in that month, I won my first bracelet. Like a couple of years after, we lived on the strip. We partied super hard. We degened and drank and went to strip clubs and played blackjack. And man, it was like a really fun time of my
Did
life.
all of
But again, that's 15 years ago. So like I'm a much different person then than I am today.
You went through all the motions. It sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on like living on the strip, like grinding online, and then like I mean, we played online a shit ton. We played on Cake Poker, where you can only withdraw like 2K a day, and we
Yeah,
both
yeah,
made
yeah. I
like
remember.
100 to 200K, and we just got a 2K check every day for months. We had so much fun back then, and it had some success. I got to swap with him on all three of his deep main event runs, so I got some like scores early on in my career. Worked with Tommy Angelo pretty early on, which is kind of a funny story as well. I went to the Deuces Cracked Connect Four charity tournament with an auction. I don't know if you remember Deuces Cracked, but
Yeah, I do remember them.
it was a $400 Connect Four buy-in. Had 33 people, 100 of it went to the prize pool, 300 went to charity, and I ended up winning it. And then using the 3,300 to bid on a 10K Tommy Angelo package for 4K, so just like 700 out of pocket. And he came to Vegas. I go to his room for like 12 hours a day. You learn how to do all this stuff mindfully. And I had learned that he worked with Galfon and a bunch of other guys. And it helped drastically. I won my bracelet the next summer, my first bracelet the next summer. And kind of haven't looked back. I would say like soon after that, I moved to Florida and played in the casinos there and got to know my now wife and played a bunch of high stakes private cash there, like 10K min by uncapped. And we some days like I remember like there was a short time period where I was like short stacking in, buying for 10K, short stacking, and then a time period where I was buying in for like 50 or 100K once I had a bigger roll for it. And I got to sit on the direct left of, we'll call him Bob, every single session, 3 days a week, and
Bob.
yeah, Bob, and
Bob.
you know,
Okay.
yeah, and ended up doing really well there until I didn't get to play the game anymore. Moved, then moved again, built a house and sold it in Vegas. We were there for about 5 years, and now we're in Nashville, and we're focused a little bit more on family and company now. But WSOP is around the corner, so I'm excited to get back in there and kick some ass.
Oh, you're in Nashville now. I feel
Yeah.
like that's a classic cool place or good place to live. It's so
We're really
normal to
liking
you.
it, to be honest.
Look at you, you're a family man now. Are you
I
still?
know.
Are you done with all the party days and all that? Now you're like have kids, and
Yeah, I'm actually completely sober now.
oh,
So I started my journey into sobriety 3 years ago when my daughter was born. I've been completely off of everything since, I don't know, over a year and a half now. And it's definitely made, been a significant life improvement for me. There are times where it's like, yeah, like smoking a joint or having a drink would be nice right now. But I would say, like, overall, it's just a huge net positive for my life. And, it allows me to be a better father, better husband, better poker player.
well, that's good news. Yay to sobriety. Um, yeah, I don't. It's actually one of the worst drugs there is. I'm not a huge drinker myself. I never really was, to be honest. Um, so, yeah, I guess a lot of everyone has to go through probably a lot of the aspiring poker players should go through the motions in some kind of way to figure out what they want in the end. I mean, I think it's kind of the way people just work these days.
Not drinking is definitely catching on. Like, the percentage of youth that doesn't drink is much higher than when we were younger.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know that. So, did you spend much time in particular in PLO and short deck, or would you say that was only a minor part of your growth as a poker player? And
Um,
if so, do you think there's much value in those games today? Because I'm trying also to help. I'm saying I'm bringing up some of these topics so that the listeners can figure out where they should make the money at. I know that there's money in MTTs, and I'm trying to figure out the global poker economy myself.
okay.
And so
I
that
understand
some
it.
for the chance cornets of the future, the potential chance cornets of the future.
So, short deck, which is funny because I've had very good results in it. I've probably played five short deck tournaments lifetime. But I would describe short deck as like a hybrid of PLO and No Limit, which are clearly my two best games. And so, figuring out what hands you want to rep and when. I figured out early on because of Ben actually that like I wanted to have limping ranges in some positions, so like pure limp ranges in some positions. And with the anti structure, the way the short deck is, like it's just a considerably different strategy. And I would say that the couple of years that I did play those tournaments, it was extremely soft. Like if I was trying to grind a bankroll now, I'd probably do the exact same thing I did back in the day, which was grind PLO cash and then jump like and play tournaments. And when I'd get down to final tables, I'd quit the cash games. And so I'd win in tournament or I'd win in cash games and lose in tournaments, and so my bankroll would look like this, and then you do well in a tournament. And so it was like kind of a rinse and repeat cycle. And so I would always use cash games to fund my tournament habit. And then, now that I have a big enough bankroll, I don't really play as much cash anymore. When I do get invited to like a good private game, like there's actually one in town that's like, people have 5 or 10K in front of them and it's pretty fun. And I also like, gotta knock the dust off and get in there and play a little poker. So I definitely do that a little bit sometimes here. But in general, yeah, when I'm in town, I just focus on the company and then I'll travel a little bit and play.
It makes a lot of sense. And actually, you make a good point. This is probably a very feasible strategy for everyone, really, what you mentioned about playing cash games as the main focus and then tournaments on the side. It just seems like too insane to play purely tournaments
I
to make
I remember
money.
the year I won the short deck. I like won the tournament, and then 3 weeks later, I was like, "How in the world do people play tournaments for a living? Like this is so miserable." And then a week later, I get like 16th in the main, and I was just like, I can't imagine how people who only grind tournaments must feel. Because I'm very lucky. I have a good skill set for tournaments. The live tells my theoretical understanding of the game are all work really well in tournaments. And I have a ton of success in them, and even the tournament variance gets to me sometimes. So I can't imagine how other people must feel that don't have success in them. It must be just miserable.
Well, yeah, and they're also probably constantly worrying about their bankroll and things like that if they're like a grinder. I don't think they have to have
Yeah.
like insane bankroll management.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, that seems like that's kind of what I did a bit. I didn't really focus that much on tournaments. I still think there's quite a lot of value in them. But we probably should have focused on them more, just because, or like expanded the breadth of things to do, which is one thing that it seemed like what you did. You kind of like chased where the value is at, and then apparently, or at least I think that's my read on you from all the bunch of different things that you did, and it looks like you at some point decided to start a company, Chip Leader Coaching. And actually, I looked a bit at your site. I checked it out. I'm a little bit curious what made you decide to start this company, to go from a poker player to starting a coaching company.
So it was actually my initial business partner's idea. His name's John Beaupre. When I had like a big year in 2016, 2017, playing like 25Ks, I think I got final table PCA and then got first in the Aussie Millions 25K and I got second in the Dublin one. He was like, dude, we got to start a company. Like, there's never been a coaching for profit for tournaments. And there's a lot of like cash game stables where they coach and take percentage of profit, but for tournaments that really hadn't been done. And so when we started, I was like, all right, so here's what we're gonna do. I need 5 students. We'll keep on having these groups, and they'll get individual sessions, and then we'll get more coaches, and that was the plan. And so in my first 5 students, one of which was actually Alex Foxen. And everyone knows the story about Alex. Now he's who he is, and we make all the products together. He's one of the equity partners in the company now as well. But we also like realized that time isn't scalable. So it's hard to scale a business when you can't scale your one-on-one and group coaching hours. So we would need so many coaches and so many students. And then we also ran into some other issues with it. So like people would lie about how much they play or planned on playing in order to get coaching. Because if our expected value is associated with how much they play, well, then that's a big issue, right? And then some people wouldn't pay. And so we decided to
Really?
kind of change the business model and go to a subscription AI platform as well as some other standalone products. And we've had, I would say, much better success now that we've been doing that, and we're headed in the right direction, I would say.
So let me get this straight. You said that how can anyone do tournaments for just purely for what they're doing, and then you decided to make a coaching training site for only tournaments.
No, I
for,
said, how can someone just play tournaments? Like, if you're trying to grind like $100 to $300 tournaments to make a living, you just can't do it. Rake's too high, structure's too bad. Like, I think that's a very difficult thing to do, But playing the good tournaments occasionally to boost your bankroll, so you can actually like go and play the circuit, go and play the WPTs, the WSOP, etc. Like, I think like one of the things I've learned in my career is that I used to always try to like play higher in bigger tournaments, bigger cash games, etc. And I ran it like up to 1 million, down to 100K like 3 times before I like stuck well above that 1 million number for my bankroll. And what I finally realized was that like I can make a lot of money and have a really good life without trying to play 100Ks. And so there is that sweet spot between the 1600 and 10K buy-in range that you can make an incredible life in tournaments if you have the right skill set.
I actually thought the 100Ks were the toughest. Well, I don't. I mean, they are,
50s might be
but
tougher than the hundreds,
what?
maybe.
Why
I
is
think
that
50s
makes
might be
sense?
tougher than the hundreds.
Why?
That's like how it was for a while. I think the hundreds draw like that special type of recreational player, and you also get less of like the pros that are able to sell enough action.
No, I guess so. Um, I would think. I mean, there was some things that I don't know how tough they really are, just because it didn't feel like they were truly implementing GTO from my perspective. It felt like they were using more of like the defensive version of GTO, not like the real version. If you know what I'm talking about. I could be wrong about that. Maybe
Yeah,
things
I
have
think
changed.
people in their head think that they're playing GTO, but in reality, they're kind of just saying like, "Oh, it's a low frequency play," or they're kind of using it to justify their actions. When in reality, they aren't implementing the overall strategy. So they might look at a hand and say like, "Yeah, see, like this fits. This is like GTO approved." But it's like, "Yeah, okay, GTO says to do this 30% of the time. Like, what percentage of the time do you think you're doing it? 80, 90, 100?" And so I don't actually think they're really thinking about the game correctly. And then also, when they look at a decision, they're looking at the decision as if they're playing against a bot. But in reality, they're playing against a human. And so their decision might be utterly atrocious. And they're justifying that bad decision by using a computer.
Sure, I definitely think a lot of that happens today. I would think that it happens more in these like 10Ks and 25Ks. I would have thought the 25Ks were, I mean, they used to be a lot softer than the 100Ks. I remember that specifically. It didn't take me long to figure that out. But I don't know what the situation is now. Like, things have definitely changed wildly since I've been like kind of doing a million things. Um, but
25Ks are
maybe
still
these,
really good.
yeah, okay, all right. If you say so. I mean, some of these tournaments I've seen are like fing great. So but I don't know. You're playing the PGT tour. I would think, okay, like that's probably where all the best players in the world are at. I don't know.
Oh no, the PGT 25Ks are awful, but every other 25K is good, I think.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
So story checks out. All right.
Yeah.
Jungle Man's raids aren't that far off. All right. So how was the experience to become an entrepreneur from poker? I mean, this is a bit more relevant to myself. I would just, from my experience, it's a wildly different. Actually, why don't you go ahead and talk before I answer for you?
Dang, I was hoping you'd answer for me. I mean, I actually really enjoy it. It has the same problem-solving aspects that you have in poker. So in each poker individual hand, you have this problem that has a theoretical answer you're trying to solve. In business, it's very simple. You either want more, like a higher percentage of people to do something when they land on your site, or to get more people to your site. So like everything has the same problem answer solution that I really like enjoy. But I would say that poker has much more of a like an instant gratification, even though it's not necessarily instant. Like you do need a sample size, but the sample size in business that you need to see the results of your like the fruits of your labor are much greater. And so like we're working on a ton of stuff right now that I did a month and a half or 3.5 months ago that we're finally starting to see the results for. So I would say that it's very similar, and I also like am lucky that I have kind of an entrepreneurial mind. You know, it's if you look at everything from a problem solution perspective and you're able to generalize the problem, you can do a pretty good job at figuring out what the solution is.
That's a fair point. I would have thought you would have mentioned something about the different skill sets before. I mean, but one of the biggest differences I think between poker and a lot of businesses in general is the feedback loop is, as you mentioned, far smaller with poker, which is one thing that's kind of great. Like you get cash really fast if you get paid, whereas if you do angel investing or whatever it is, the feedback loop is like really small. In entrepreneurship, I think it's like much faster, especially for considering a number of like micro decisions such as how you respond to people. Like one realization for myself was that I mean this is actually true in poker is that your social behavior, um, which I don't know if I really have the perfect perspective on this, but in certain ways it certainly changed. But your social behavior actually translates to edge in terms of money in poker eventually, which is not the case in a lot of other businesses. Like if you're like in bad business, if you're a scammer, it doesn't translate. But I mean, it kind of does. Even there, you kind of have to learn all like the fake stuff, or the upfront stuff, like being really charming or whatever it is. But uh, I would think in business it translates a lot more, and you have to keep a schedule, and you have to be really on point with a number of things. Or have you not found that to be the case for yourself? Whereas in poker, you do
Um,
not have to be like this.
I definitely think it matters. I would say that the cool thing about poker and business is that if you have a problem that you don't know the answer to, you can find a solution. Whether it's studying, buying a product, learning from people who have done it before, surrounding yourself with successful people in that area. Like that's one of the things that's always helped me in poker is surrounding myself with great minds. Like Ben initially, Foxen now. And then in business, it's the same thing. I have a community of friends here in Nashville that are 20 years older that have had incredible amounts of success in business and have been generous enough with their time to sit down with me and look at all my stuff and be like, I'd recommend changing this, this, and this. And it's like, done. Okay, no problem. And so learning from like you can take time and like change stuff and look at the numbers and see what the solution is, or you can trust people who have done it before.
Yeah, I would think definitely would pay attention to who's actually had success for sure. Um, at least for me, it was really I had to change my like. I think at poker, one of the the cool things is about the lifestyle. It's kind of underrated. Is you don't really have to keep a schedule with anyone, um, and also advertising poker for that reason. For a lot of like adolescents or whatever, you don't have to have a boss. You don't have to check in at 9 a.m. or whatever it is. You don't have to like schedule everything really with a lot of efficiency. But you do have to start doing this during business, which I found to be a hard shift.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. The one thing about business is, especially running your own business, is we'll have developers text us and it's like dinner time with the family, and I'm like, I'm just gonna respond right now because, yeah, like I do feel bad that I'm taking my focus away from my family. But if I respond right now, then the chances that they can finish what they're working on so the next day, and it's just like a snowball effect of efficiency. And there's a lot of stuff like that in business where doing something right then has a lot of benefit. And when you're running your own company, I would say that, we do have the ability to set our own hours. It's like I can be in the office when I want, I can spend time with my family when I want, but it also creates the urgency, I guess, that makes me want to complete certain tasks before a certain time frame.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that for sure. I mean, I've had a bit of a relationship with that where I got more into the habit of like doing things that needed to be done like immediately versus being lazy and doing whatever. That's also something you can do as a poker player. Like,
Have you read
quality time.
Traction?
Traction?
Yeah, it's a business book.
Should I read Traction?
Yeah, like one of the biggest takeaways I would say is like if you think about like rocks, pebbles, and sand, or like of these tasks, just think about the things that move the needle the most. And from like a business perspective, before I was spending a lot of my time doing stuff that like doesn't really move the needle, doesn't change the bottom line. Might be usable later, but doesn't actually help in the short term. And organizing your to-do list, I guess you could say, for your business in order of importance is like very important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's the same thing in poker. In poker, like you want to fix your pre-flop before you start messing around with post flop, or there's various things in post flop that will like wildly simplify or wildly help your game quite a lot.
Yeah, but that's obvious
Uh,
for us now because of our level of experience in poker.
yeah, but I'm stating this also for the the viewers so that
Oh
they
yeah, yeah,
know
okay. Yeah,
to
you
make the
definitely want to start.
macro adjustments.
Yeah, I definitely
That's a
recommend starting as you go. Pre-flop, flop, turn,
yes.
river, or fundamentals in theory. Pre-flop, flop, turn, river.
What you're stating is actually called. Actually, there's actually a term for this. It's called problematizing in practical philosophy, which I learned to see the value in, but I don't have time to focus on it now. But it's basically philosophy, which is practical, and problematizing is just formulating the way in which you look at the problem, so you figure out a more effective way of solving it. So the equivalent in poker would be, okay, well, so all these things I can work on, but what's going to generate the most EV? As you said, same thing as business, which, I mean, I haven't mastered business, but I have mastered poker. Biggest things would be fundamentals for a lot of people. And then I think live tells is kind of on the lower end personally. But we get into the point where I want your opinion on this in a second. But I would put fundamentals first, and then something like adjusting to players after that, and then something like I don't know, like timing and psychology and focusing on live tells and all these other soft skills somewhere beneath that. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree, but when you say adjusting to players, like live tells kind of goes in there because adjusting to
Yeah,
what their range is, right? So like yes, adjusting to players and knowing that okay, this guy's tighter or looser, so I should make these theoretical adjustments and play my range a certain way. Or this guy's folding to too many three bets, so I want to three bet considerably more polarly. And this guy's calling too many three bets, so I want to just three bet more of the ace 10 ace jack combos. Like those
yeah.
are incredible, important player adjustments. But if you know someone's at the bottom of their range, you can just throw theory out the window and do exactly what your hand wants to do versus someone who's weak, and vice
Well,
versa.
you
If
also
someone's strong and you have a bad hand or a good hand, and like if you have a good hand or a great hand and you can beat a strong range, the amount of value you can get from that is insane.
yeah, that's true. It's just a very like I think it's very valuable. I just think it's very specific situational stuff that just doesn't really happen that much. On top of that, you need to know like how they're going to respond because sometimes like, there's one strange thing I've noticed that's an overarching the theme is like when you play against nits or tight players, they actually fold quite a bit to pretty strong aggression, even when they are strong, because they know that they're nits. I think is what it is, and that they're just naturally tighter in general. So it's
I
kind of
thought of a
like
good way to think about this one actually. So I always teach my students we perceive what we do. And so if you're a nit, you don't perceive others to bluff.
right.
And so if think about the opposite side of that coin. Like I'm really aggressive, right? So I always think people are bluffing me. But tight players just give credit because they don't bluff themselves.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I generally agree. The term is projection, by the way. This is
Yeah, but
just a
it also
very
applies to life, not just poker. So like, if someone's surprised that you trust them with a certain decision, it's probably because they're not very trustworthy.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you can learn to read people in this kind of way. I realized actually, and I kind of learned the hard way. Um, a couple funny things like this. Confidence and like inner confidence and things like this are something that's developed over your experiences or like the absence of it. But one thing I noticed is these guys that, or people in general that have succeeded in life, it's because they've had this route towards confidence and they tend to be more, they tend to positively project. They tend to think, oh, you can do it too. I believe in you, like all that kind of stuff. Whereas the people that have had
Interesting.
the opposite people that have had the opposite experience will do the opposite. They'll be like, "Oh no, like no, don't try anything impossible. If it's impossible, like you keep your head down, like that kind
Yeah, I
of
mean the
shit."
confidence in people you work with is almost contagious too.
Well, yeah, I mean everything's contagious, really, but that's part of like, I mean, I personally view it as like optimal social strategy, but typically speaking, I mean, I think it's solvable in the same way poker is personally, but this is the autistic version of me coming out with like weird ideas. I still think it is. I'm convinced that there's an optimal social strategy of sorts.
I mean, but again, right? Don't you need to adjust the player type? Like there's an optimal strategy socially against like everyone you're interacting with. Like
Oh, of
certain,
course,
yeah.
of course. Actually, some of my I let you in. I'll say a little secret. Part of my attempt to portray all these different characters in acting is a little bit of an ego thing to me because I think like, okay, if I can be like the DJ, which I have not succeeded in being the DJ, by the way, I can be like the guy that adjusts to every personality. It's like an ego thing. Like, okay, maybe I can be everyone. But it's a very hard thing to do, as I learned. But that would be part of in that kind of direction. But if done in the right way, anyway. It's,
Well, even like professional actors, like Hollywood actors, have certain roles that they're good at, right? So like
yeah,
think
yeah,
of
of
Jason
course.
Statham. He's just going to be a badass with a gun. He's going to kill some people. He's going to rescue others. Like that's his role. So like you
Yeah,
don't have to be able to be every single role without being elite. Like even in poker, there's certain roles that I struggle with. Like I'm very good and adept and experienced at being the table captain and running over the table, but there's times where I have to take a backseat where it hurts me, and
oh
I
yeah.
have
I
a
mean,
lot of trouble with it. And like the insides of me are just at like battling each other and just like I want to three bet this guy. I'm tired of him raising every pot. It's hard.
yeah, yeah. I've had that too. Does I kind of have to like really kind of manipulate myself or kind of what's the word? Pry myself is the one thing that I presume is a lot of. It's another psychological thing to do, but to make sure you don't like. There's times in tournaments where you can't around as you can't be too combative. I should say when you have like the lower stack size, as you mentioned, where it's like the opposite skill set almost of being the chip stack or the chip leader. But I mean, there's ways of that up too. Actually, speaking of which, we should talk a bit about your products that you've got because you've got one that's a bit about chip leading is my understanding and about tournament play and how to do all of that stuff. You've got the chip leader AI that I personally was curious of how that worked. That seemed like a really advanced and novel thing. I've never heard of this in the poker market as well. I mean, you've also got the soft skill optimization route, and you've got a lot of things going on. It looks like. Do you want to talk about what some of your products and what are your thoughts on are making them?
Yeah, I'll start with our two flagship products. The first of which being Chip Leader AI. It's a subscription platform, I guess you could say. And I remember I was at this Chinese New Year party years ago with a guy, introducing, I play poker coaching site, yada, yada, yada. He's like, I have a childhood education, like AI platform with learning. And I'm like, and he's like, and you can teach it to teach anything. And so the way that Chip Leader AI is designed is as a student gets in there and like starts playing and doing the different hands, and like each hand kind of looks like a poker checker, right? You like, it folds, do you pre-flop? Do you open or fold? Or sometimes it's much more elaborate, like on the river after all these decisions, like what's the optimal decision? Sometimes it even says like against a tight player, against a loose player under ICM constraints. But as the engine gets to know you as a player, if you're struggling at something, it'll keep feeding you those like rudimentary, like kind of simple decisions until you have a better understanding before it shoots you into the branches and like opens all the learning paths. Because like you said, you have to understand pre-flop before you can really dive deeper into the hand. And so the AI machine that I actually designed the brain. So like I designed, you have to learn this before this, before this, before this, but it's like much more intricate and literally does kind of look like a tree as it grows. So it's like you have to start here, and then as you open these different paths to these branches, you can learn all of the different concepts. And then in that thing, we also have every single path or node in the pick your path section. So if someone just specifically wants to go and look at facing three bets or three betting or squeezing or four betting or even just pre-flop raising or triple barreling, so there's over 180 or 200 different nodes that you can go and practice like individually if you know exactly what you want to work on. Plus we have weekly online sessions and webinars that we upload. So like the online sessions are kind of like a private Twitch stream. I'll play online, camera, screen record, and I'll talk through all my decisions to really give the students an idea of what I'm thinking about while I'm playing. And then the webinars are, you can win a one-on-one or two-on-one rather with me and Foxen, and we'll answer all the students' questions about various topics or a hand history review or something like that. So we upload one of those each week as well. We have 5 new hands that initially, like our 4,000 hands were just like written explanations. Like we went into our poker tracker and got 30 hands from each of the different nodes and paired them and then wrote correct and incorrect answers and wrote written explanations. But now in the 5 new hands per week, it's actually a video response to what the decision is. So it's much more elaborate on what the correct decision is. That's Chip Leader AI, which we actually have a special for right now to help people prepare for the WSOP. So just use coupon code WSOP25 for 25% off annual. And then our other flagship product is the Closer, which I also did with Foxen. And it basically takes every stage of the tournament, early game, middle game, approaching the bubble, direct bubble, post bubble, approaching the final table, and then final table play, heads up, three-handed, etc. And talks about like what you should be thinking about at each stage. And so I think one of people's biggest issue in tournaments is knowing what they should be doing. Are they risk on, are they risk off, and why? And we help people really give a detailed understanding of that in the Closer. And then we also have a full final table review of his WPT 5 diamond win.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I actually, I had a couple questions